All right. Hey, everyone. I'm David. I'm an alcoholic. Um, I've been sober since September 15th of 1993, in AA since May of 1987. Um, I live in Frisco, Texas, but I'm deeper south than that right now. I'm on the border in McAllen, Texas, in a pretty low rent hotel. So I'm really grateful that the internet's working as good as it is. But I got started young. I got in trouble when I was 19. My first meeting was when I was 19. I was home from school and came to after a hard night drinking in my mom's spare bedroom and didn't know where I was, didn't know how I got there. My parents were smart. As soon as I left for college, my mom turned my bedroom into a sewing room. And so I was in her guest room, and my stepfather, his contribution to the family furnishings was this old, it may not have been that old then, but it would be old now, like one of those 70s water beds, you know, with the big oak headboards and the, frosted gold glass mirror and the glass doors for the bookshelves. And it was a king, and so when you're on it, like if you pushed on the corner, a whole wave would go across, like a pool. And so I come to on this bed, and I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got there. I'm hallucinating, and I don't know why I'm hallucinating. And I endeavor for about the next 5 hours to freak out about my life, about a real deep sadness that I had that I'll talk to you guys about more. Um, but let's paint the picture of David's first meeting, right? So here I am. It's about 9 in the morning. I've been laying there crying and staring at myself in this smoked glass mirror, seeing my face turn red. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm Irish, so I'm real prone to turning red, and I look like the devil. And I was straight up freaking out. And my mom knocks on the door to get me ready for work. I had to go. I had a summer job that I worked at for several years. And so I was in that alcoholic position that I know there's no doubt in my mind, no matter whether you're just a straight drinker or a drug user or a drinking drug user or whatever you are, you're going to probably relate to this because we get ourselves in places where we have to be sober, where we can't be inebriated, right? And I'm so inebriated that I can't not act inebriated, and I can't be inebriated in my mom's dining room. And so I get in the shower and I take one of those long first hot then cold showers, just trying to wash the feeling out of me. And it's not working at all. And I kind of stagger into the living room. I didn't stagger because I was going to fall down. I staggered because I was being so careful about the way I walked, because I thought if my mom really watched the way I walked, she would recognize that something was wrong with me. And so I'm kind of walking like a robot, and then I'm swinging my arms more, and then I'm bouncing a little, but then I'm getting real stiff. And I sit down, and my mom was a super happy person. She would sing all the time. Her favorite thing to sing in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, and she knew it. She was a little passive aggressive, was Celebrate by, I think, Casey and the Sunshine Band or something. And she's singing, and I sit down to a good Southern breakfast, grits and eggs and bacon and toast, and I have this fork in my hand, and I'm desperately trying to eat like a normal person, but I can't understand why the food is moving around on the plate, and I can't make myself put the food into my mouth. And I'm like literally struggling with the fork with scrambled eggs on it, and they're falling off. And my mom stops singing and looks at me and starts asking me what's wrong with me. And I truly didn't know what was wrong with me. I found out later that in a blackout that my friends all bought drugs and gave me some of them, and I was so drunk that they didn't think I was ever going to come out of it, so they took me home. And I came out of it in my mom's spare bedroom, and I had my mom next to me kind of yelling at me about why I looked so weird and why there wasn't any color in my eyes. And I kind of screamed at her, "Mom, I'm tripping. I don't know what's wrong. Just get away from me." And I got in trouble. That's why I went to AA the first time. Anybody go to AA the first time because you got in trouble, maybe with your parents, your job, or your wife? Well, I got in trouble with my parents, and they were going to cut me off. And so that summer, the summer of 1987, I stayed sober. I went to meetings every day. I picked Narcotics Anonymous, not because I thought I was more of a drug addict or an alcoholic, because I'd been a blackout drinker at 19 years old since I was a freshman in high school. So I didn't pick Narcotics Anonymous because I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I picked it because I thought that you could drink there. I thought that they didn't think that alcohol was a problem. And the first thing for those of you who have ever been to a meeting is they read these sheets. Now, I haven't been to an NA meeting in probably 25 years. And I still remember this one phrase. It says, alcohol is a drug. We are in the grips of a progressive illness and must abstain from all drugs in order to recover. And I remember thinking to myself, no, they don't expect me not to drink all summer. And sure enough, they did. So I made it through the summer. I went back to school and the gut came back. So now I'm going to revisit with you for a minute some of the things that were wrong with me. I named it. I called it the gut. So I probably everyone on this Zoom call has fallen in love. I was a person, and probably a lot of you fell in love young, like I did. I came from a broken home, and when this girl Kelly told me she loved me, it totally transformed the way I felt about life. You know, when she held my hands and looked in my eyes, and she had a really nice family from the good neighborhood of North Dallas, and they took me to restaurants, and I came home to a house where it was just my mom because she hadn't remarried yet, and I was a latchkey kid, you know. And so Kelly gave meaning to my life that I just didn't have, you know. And I fell in love with her when I was 15, and she was my girlfriend all the way through high school. And my friend Chip used to go, Greenleaf, that girl's giving you the gut, because I just couldn't be happy unless I was around her. Like, I couldn't go out with my friends without Kelly coming, and I couldn't do stuff without her coming. And then, of course, we would break up. And so the gut took on a new meaning. When I was a freshman in college, I had gone to the college I went to so that I could be close to Kelly. And then, of course, she decided she wanted to see other people her senior year in high school. So she broke up with me. There were more reasons than that, but we'll just stick with that for the sake of this story. And the gut changed. So the gut now turned, it was the same butterflies. It was the same feeling of kind of the stomach, only instead of just butterflies, it was more like butterflies with kind of nausea and fear. So now the gut was new. The gut was something that I couldn't get away from. So when I came home from college that summer and I drank myself into a blackout and my friends bought drugs and I took them, the fact of the matter was I had been spending months as a teenager doing everything that I could to drink away the gut, to anesthetize the way I felt. And the awful part about that period of my life is I never believed that the gut would go away, that I would always live with this sick feeling in my stomach, that I would always reminisce or think back into shameful ways that I behaved and the wrong things that I did and the love that I lost and the future that would no longer be. And I would lay in bed at night. I remember the spirals that I used to take all my notes in college. All the margins of the spirals were filled with words from Pink Floyd, The Wall, you know. Does anybody else in here feel the way I do? I mean, I was just absolutely depressed. I had been traumatized in the sense of like psychological trauma, having feelings and emotions and loss that my brain and my body did not know how to metabolize. And I could not drink enough or drug enough to make it go away. And, you know, for me, drinking was something that my goal in drinking always was just to get at a place where like everything got still. Yeah, I wanted to party. Yeah, I wanted to have fun times with my friends, and I did all those things. I had a lot of great times drinking, but where I really wanted to get drinking was about a half a beer before getting nauseous. You know, I just wanted to get to that point where I was maximum drunk, but still able to function. And of course, for those of you who are blackout drinkers like me, you know, that is a tenuous place. And oftentimes I overshot the mark and I ended up in a lot of trouble. So I'll tell you, I did learn a valuable lesson that summer. That lesson was, one, where AA was. But two, don't go home for summer anymore. And I didn't. I stayed in school. I did summer school. I ended up going to UT in Austin, the Longhorns, and I graduated from UT in 1990. And I came home a horrible, horrible alcoholic drug user who absolutely could not stop any of it long enough to even get a job. Now, living in that same bed, failure to launch because I just couldn't get myself to function. I could not function. And I remembered that place. And I started going to AA again. And I went to NA some, but I for some reason, whatever it was, the AA groups around me, I just felt more comfortable there. And it wasn't that I could tell you the difference between the message because I don't know it. It was just for me, that is where I went. And I started trying to get sober. And so I'm a big time retread. That wasn't my only relapse when I went back to school. I probably picked up 15 to 20 desire chips over the next 2 years, desperately wanting to get sober. And the thing is that I would pick up a desire chip, and every desire chip that I picked up, it genuinely felt like things were going to be different this time. I had some sort of epiphany or some kind of seeing myself for what I was, and I really believed that I had suffered enough, and that the people around me had suffered enough, and that why would I drink again, right? And I would go to meetings every day. I would do my 90 and 90. I went to treatment a couple times. And I would follow what I was like the star pupil at treatment, voted head of my group at the mental institution, right? Special, yeah, right? Straight A's. First time I was National Honor Society was a treatment center guy. And I would come out of those treatment centers with all of this hope and all of this belief that things were going to be different. And I would relapse, and the stories in the big book were really what I believed would be my undoing for life. And you listen to the stories about Jim and Fred, where they're talking about really, besides Bill, the two big relapsers in the big book, they had this problem. And it wasn't that they knew they were going to get drunk or they were fighting a drink or the 1,000-pound phone or they didn't call their sponsor. One of them was having a crappy day and one of them was having a great day. And suddenly the thought crossed their mind. And that kept happening to me. I would be driving to my mom's house, and instead of going straight, I would turn left and I would end up at the beer store because the thought crossed my mind, Thanksgiving dinner would be more enjoyable if I drank a couple beers first. In my crazy mind, in the big book, it says it so perfectly. It says, if these thoughts occur, the consequences, they are hazily supplanted by the threadbare idea. And that happened to me over and over. I would be going down the street with the best of intentions. The thought would cross my mind. I'd be at a concert. I'd let the joint pass in front of me 20 times. And then one time I'd just grab it and smoke it. It was so sudden that I didn't believe there was any way that there would be a defense to that this was just going to happen to me for the rest of my life. So you shoot forward to September of 1993, the month I got sober. I had just gotten married to a woman that I got pregnant on our first date. Yes, that I'm a good alcoholic. I know how to act out in all sorts of ways. And so I got this girl pregnant. I decided that I wasn't going to participate in what you call an unwanted pregnancy again, that I was going to do right by this person. I'd been trying to get sober now for over 2 years, meetings every day. And I thought, maybe this is the answer. I'll do the right thing. I'll stand up and take responsibility for myself. And so I got married. And about 2 weeks after I got married, I relapsed again and destroyed everything, sold all of our stuff, traded all of our stuff. My parents moved her out of the apartment. My mom crying, begging her to forgive her that she didn't tell her what I was, because even my parents had hoped, a baby on the way and a marriage, maybe this is the answer to David's problems, right? And so I'm sitting in this apartment. It's about 10 in the morning and I am convulsively crying. I've been up for 3 days on a hard run and everything's gone. It looked like the morning after the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. They had taken like even the toaster because they'd know I'd take it to the pawn shop, right? And I'm sitting in this apartment and I have a butcher knife stuck in my arm because I'm contemplating like injuring myself, not to kill myself, but so that she'll know how much I love her, I mean, that's where I was in terms of like relationship management. I was going to injure myself so she would know that she needed to be with me. That's crazy, right? But that's how I was thinking. And as I'm sitting there, just like convulsively crying, a mantra of, I've done AA, I've tried, I can't do it. Everything that I touch turns to crap. If you love me, you are going to suffer from that love. That is what I knew at that moment, that the people who loved me, that stuck with me, to the extent that they loved me and stuck with me, they were going to suffer at the hands of my disease and who I was as a person. And no matter how much I tried, it did not work. And at that moment, I had a thought. And the thought was that this is what they mean when they say that I am powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable. This is what they're talking about. And my next thought is that I had never worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew it. And I didn't know it before that because I was a person who, if I lied about something, I believed it. Like, I'm the kind of person that if I had lied to you and you believed it, and then you found out that I had lied to you and you accused me of lying, I would be offended that you were accusing me of lying about something that you had already told me you believed, right? So who suffers the most from that? Those people can get away from that stuff, right? I'm stuck with that guy. I'm stuck with the guy who believes his own lies and pays the consequences of not being who I claim to be. And it may be crazy to go and drink a beer after you picked up 20 Desire Chips and you were at a meeting that day. I don't doubt that that's crazy. That's kind of alcoholism, right? Let me tell you what I really believe is insane. Going to AA meetings every day for 3 years and not working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous from the big book. That is insane. And that's what I had done. I had heard people talking about meeting with their sponsor and starting at the preface and going through and following the instructions. I saw all these people around me with big books that were all highlighted and marked up and little tabs, and they carried around spirals and they had big book studies and step studies. And I had seen all of this going on around me. And yet it did not occur to me that I wasn't doing that until that day. On September 15th, 1993, I recognized that I had not done what the people in AA do that have long-term sobriety and successful, reasonably happy lives. And so my decision was that I was going to go ask. I didn't know who it was going to be. I was going to ask one of those big book thumpers. That was not a term of endearment. That was a way I made fun of people. That I was going to get one of those big book thumpers, those AA wannabe gurus who won't stop spontaneously quoting the book, the really irritating ones who like get weepy because they're so grateful, that kind of makes your stomach turn a little bit because you're like, ugh, stop. That I was going to ask one of those people to help me. And so I took one of those long showers I hadn't used in about 12 hours because I ran out. And I took a long shower and I went up to my AA group and I stood by the coffee maker. I got there about 11:40. And about 11:45, the worst of the worst came limping in. This guy, Clovis. Clovis was one of those people. Always had his big book in his hand. Always was quoting it. Always was talking about the text and how it meant, what it meant in his life. With 1 out of 3 times he shared, tear up, expressing feelings that I couldn't relate to. I was irritated by people expressing their feelings because I couldn't relate to them. I couldn't understand, why are these people crying? I had always been a person who always made something about people who had success in their lives, something about them to completely disavow everything, like he got divorced, or he got caught cheating on his taxes, or he hit on a newcomer or whatever, right? I would always come up with something so that these people who had long-term sobriety, that were doing the best to live this life, that the human things about them that we all have, made what they had to say and what they did BS. Just like the kids in soccer who were more talented than me and worked harder, I didn't think that they were starting ahead of me because they were better than me. I thought they were starting ahead of me because the coach was favorites. They were coach's favorites, They were ass kissers, right? I was never able to see that I wasn't doing. So that's why I asked Clovis to sponsor me. And Clovis said to me, "Oh, you think you're going to get sober now?" which was not what I was expecting. I thought that he should be more loving and like excited about spending time with me, you know? And and I remember looking at him, and I was at one of those turning points because I was a little bit offended by his tone, you know? And I sucked it down, you know? Willingness is sometimes sucking it down, not saying what you're thinking, not acting on what you're feeling. Because what I was feeling and what I was thinking was just tell this guy to F off and turn around and walk out of here. This is BS. But I said, you know what, Clovis, I'll do anything you tell me to do. And the first thing he asked me was, do you have a big book? And I said, yes. And he said, have you highlighted in it? I said, no. He goes, all right, I want you to get a yellow highlighter. And I want you to start at the preface, and I want you to highlight anything that sounds like the problem of alcoholism or the solution to the problem of alcoholism. Here's an example. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. That is a problem. If you have that problem, you're in trouble. But I also want you to highlight what sounds like the solution to the problem. And it says, strange as it may seem to those who do not understand, the same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol as long as he follows a few simple rules. And I said, all right, I was not in a good spot. I'm 3 days up. My wife of 2.5 weeks, who's pregnant, is gone to Wichita Falls back with her family. And all I've got is a big book. And he told me to go buy a cheap spiral. He even didn't want me to buy a fancy spiral because he knew I was going to show up with some leather bound spiral because I'm all grandiose. He wanted a cheap little spiral with a wire down the end. And he wanted me to bring that with me and meet me at the noon meeting on Friday. And starting that Friday, we began to work the steps from the big book. We had assignments every week. Every week I read. We talked about what I read. He told me his experience, strength, and hope on what we read. And then he said, for instance, the allergy, the abnormal reaction. After we read that, he stopped me. He said, David, I want you to talk to me about your abnormal reaction. And we talked about it for a few minutes. What separates you? What makes you different than the normal, average, temperate drinker? What are the things that you do? Where are the places that you go? How do you know that you're different from other people? And then I want you to go home and I want you to write about it. You can write a list, which is what I did. And then I came back and I shared that with him. We did Bill's story, and he said, you need to tell your story. I need to hear about your descent into alcoholism. I need to hear about how you started out as a war hero. I did, Bill did, as a war hero, and ended up, punching your wife in the face to steal her purse and her money after she got home from work so you could buy booze, which is what Bill did. I need to hear what happened to you, how you became unemployed and unemployable. And I followed those instructions. And there's a really crazy part to AA, because before you do what I'm describing, it doesn't make any sense. And once I did it, I didn't need it to make sense because it just kind of changed me. I remember we got to step 10 in the big book, and we just read the 9th step promises that we're all very familiar with, and then the 10th step promises, which are on the next page. And he said to me, you guys know what it says. It says, we've been placed in a position of neutrality. We haven't even sworn off. The problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. Well, I hadn't thought about that, but here I am reading it, and I had highlighted it. And Clovis said, you used to talk about the gut a lot, how you'd get the gut and you had to drink, and what was going to happen when you got the gut again. Have you had the gut? And I tried to conjure it. I started thinking about frat parties and all the different ugly scenes that I'd been in involving heavy drinking and drug use and all of this stuff, trying, I don't know, it's probably crazy to try to conjure the gut in yourself, but I'm trying to make myself feel that way because I hadn't felt that way and I couldn't remember the last time I felt that way. And I want you guys to know, I've been sad, I've had loss, I've done bad things in recovery, made big moral failures. I have a lot of regrets. I've been sober almost 30 years, and I've been a human being for 30 years, and I've made mistakes, and I have felt bad about those things, but I've never had the gut since. Never. There's a difference. There's a difference between grief and sadness and natural emotions and being really sick. and no one wants to have grief and no one wants to have sadness. But when you're as sick as I was, it was just my natural state. And that went away for me then. And, it's crazy. In chapter 2, I think it's either chapter 2 or 3, there's this line that says, the moment he decided to go on with the process, he had the curious feeling that his alcohol problem had been solved. That's not exactly the words. And that turned out to be the case for me. And I didn't even realize it till I looked back and I realized, oh my gosh, it's not that I don't have to drink anymore. It's that I don't need to drink anymore. Alcoholics Anonymous didn't teach me how not to drink. Alcoholics Anonymous taught me a way to metabolize my feelings, to look at my resentments and go across a 4-column inventory. And yes, other people do wrong things, and I can acknowledge those things. I love that AA, after you do your first 3 columns, it says in the book, or maybe the first 2, it says, what is clear is the world and its people are often wrong and hurt us. AA doesn't tell us that we don't look at other people's behavior, but that's as far as I got, just like you guys. I couldn't get past my grudges. And AA taught me how to get to a place where I had behavior that I could take responsibility for, and I could take action on that behavior. And all of a sudden, forgiveness came into my life, tolerance came into my life, patience came into my life for the first time in my life. And I'm not saying people didn't try to teach me that. I'm not even beginning to say that the people around me in my life, in my childhood and in my upbringing, whatever, didn't do those things and live those ways and have spiritual ways about them. I'm just telling you, before I worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was impossible for me to forgive. It was impossible. I did not know how to do it. I could go to church all day and you could say, turn the other cheek and love your enemy and say, pray for them or whatever you want. But until I did a real 4th step and 5th step, and then followed that up with a study of my character defects and my willingness to let them go and asking God to remove them, following that up with making a list of how I harm people with my character defects and being willing to go to those people and set those matters straight. Until I did that, I had no idea what it felt like to forgive someone. I had never moved on from any injustice. They just stacked up. My way of dealing with life was to act like excuse my language, act like stuff didn't happen long enough that everyone else acted like it didn't happen. That was my best version. Just be quiet and act like you didn't do it. And Alcoholics Anonymous gave me a way to solve those things, at least inside of me. So I've been sober basically my entire adult life. I've been living with the information I just gave you guys for a long time. What is the most important thing? What do you get to talk about for the next 10 minutes, And the story that always comes to my mind, I've been through a lot of things. I've been through divorce, I've been through bankruptcy, I've been through job loss, I've been through the death of the most important people in my life. My mom and my dad died very young while I was in recovery, in early recovery. At least it seems like early recovery now. I was 10 years sober when my mom came to me, and she told me that she had a reoccurrence of this mole that was on her head when I was in college. And it turned out to be metastatic melanoma that was in her liver, her lungs, and her brain. And she was a perfectly healthy person sitting on my bed telling me that she was not going to be alive in 4 months. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know. There's a line in the 12 and 12. Everyone should read this. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, please go back and read this. It's where the idea of two-stepping comes from. And it's in step 12 of the 12 and 12. And it says, but what happens when life hands you something that you cannot, a lump you cannot swallow, let alone digest? What happens when life hands you a lump that you cannot swallow, let alone digest? Do we AAs have an answer for that? And you need to read the rest around it, because the answer isn't maybe as obvious as is apparent if you can't remember it. And so I was handed a lump that I couldn't swallow. I lived 3 streets over from my mom. I'm not saying you guys don't love your mom. I bet you guys, many of you love your mom just like I love my mom. But I want you to know something. There's not a man alive who ever loved his mama more than I love my mom. I mean, I was a mama's boy. If you started picking on me, I would tell you I was going to go get my mom. I mean, I loved my mom. When my dad left my family for his secretary, I slept in my mom's room with her from fourth grade to eighth grade because I could not stand to think of my mom crying herself to sleep and being alone. That was the kind of relationship. Probably pretty unhealthy looking back, but it was still a very deep, enmeshed relationship. And when she was dying and I was there with her dying, it was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced in my life, bar nothing. And so she had been in hospice for about 3 weeks. She was about 2 weeks away from dying. And she was in a hospital bed in the living room where I grew up. And I went over to tell her that I was going to birthday night at my group to pick up my 11-year chip. And I get there and she's wearing one of those little Mexican ship dresses, like when you go to Mexico back in the 70s or 80s, women would come back with these like embroidered dresses, real cute and bright. It was like bright pink. And she's sitting there. She weighs like 60 pounds. And she can't speak, hasn't spoken for weeks because she has something called Broca's aphasia. The tumors had hit an area of her brain where she could no longer communicate. She couldn't blink at you. She couldn't write things. She couldn't snap her fingers. She couldn't communicate. And my stepdad said, when I told her you were coming over to go to birthday night, she went and got dressed. And I said, Mom, you think you can do this? And it's one of the last things I ever heard her say. She said, going. So I pick her up and I carry her to the car and I take her to my AA group and we sit in the non-smoking fish tank in the back of the group. And everyone there knew what was going on. I was then and am still a daily member of my group. And so the world knew when my mom was carried in there, who was being carried in and what was happening. And I remember I went up there to pick up my chip, and it wasn't really hard. There was a little twinkle, a little spot of joy in that darkness that my mom was there. And I look back and she's waving at me. And I'm trying to talk, and all I can think is that Alcoholics Anonymous gave my mom the son that she never believed that she would get to have. Before I got sober, people would ask my mom, how's David doing? She shared this with me at Family Week. It was hard to hear. And she began to be scared to be around people who knew me, which was everyone we knew, because she didn't want to have to explain what was going on with me because it was so heartbreaking to her that she couldn't stand the way she felt. And here I sit before you. It's been 19 years since that day that she was at my group, and I still know that I am the son that my mother always wanted me to be, even though I have made moral failings and mistakes and done things that I'm ashamed of that I've had to go back and fix. That I have made the human errors that human beings make. There's kind of a weird thing about being sober. So when I got sober because I couldn't stand the way I felt anymore. But every time I picked up a desire chip, it was usually because of consequences that I wanted to get better, right? And when you get sober and you stop, drinking and drugging and doing whatever you do that consumes my life, when I got sober, a lot of those things that I had gotten sober for before got better, when I made my amends to my wife, about 3 months later, when it was time to make my amends, I didn't rush into it because I just had to tell her I loved her, right? I listened to my sponsor and I was willing to go to any lengths. And sometimes willing to go to any lengths means you do things when your sponsor tells you it's time to do them. You don't do step 9 when you're on step 1, right? Which is what I had always done in the past. I did step 9 when I was on step 9. And so I made amends to my soon-to-be ex-wife. And a few days later, she showed back up at our apartment. And she said that she could tell something was different about me. And so we have that little girl, Libby. She goes by Houston now, but She was born a few months later. And then we had our son, Seth, and my job became a career, which was something that grew into something meaningful. And we lived in a little bit nicer homes and drove a little bit nicer cars and got to go on a little bit prettier vacations. And we got to watch our kids grow up in a completely drug and alcohol free home. And they became healthy kids who weren't big troublemakers and screw ups like I had been, which was a miracle to me because I thought for sure I was going to get what I deserved for the way I treated my parents. And all of those things got better and better. But what I didn't recognize, what I didn't know, is so many of the things that were wrong with me were still wrong with me. I no longer had the craving to drink and drug, but I made a mistake. And the reason I bring this up, because if I have anything to offer anyone that has been life-changing for me, it has been when I got divorced, which was 6-7 years ago. I was forced, because I wanted to save my marriage, into counseling. I refused to go. Why go? Everything's great, right? Life is good. But I was forced because my now ex-wife, she told me where I was going to go and who I was going to see. And I went to this place and I started to have this therapy. It doesn't matter what. I don't want to get into that type of thing, in the sense that this is not a medical conference on, EMDR or anything. But I went and I did these things to deal with some of the stuff that I didn't even know had troubled me my whole life. Things that I didn't even really remember. And I gained from that experience, I think, what Bill W. gained. It's well known that Bill W. suffered from depression. It's also pretty well known that he did some pretty extreme things to try to get past it, because he was so depressed and suicidal at times that he was willing to do anything. And doing those things, instead of doing what I thought, which was showing some kind of weakness or disregard for the power of AA, like I just thought if I worked the steps harder, right? And then, I remember I was sitting with my counselor, my therapist, who also is a recovering alcoholic. And when I'm talking about this, I mean, I've worked the steps 30 times and I've taken hundreds of people through the steps. And she said, David, the book says you're supposed to get outside help if you need it. And so I guess the moral to my story here is, and I don't really know where to stop when I talk about this stuff because I'm running out of time and I don't want to just belabor this point, but I just want you to know something, that my experience is that getting help outside of AA has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It's offered me a new freedom beyond what I had already had in AA, which has been nothing but a beautiful experience. I cannot express to you guys enough how deeply indebted and honor I hold the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 and 12, these meetings, you people sitting here with me. We're together here tonight. I know I'm sharing my story, but I hope that my story resonates with your story and that we're in this together, that commonality that we have is just the most important thing to me in the world. And I can always do a little bit better. It's why we're here. If you've been sober 20, 30, 40 years and the newcomer's wondering why you're still here, this is why I'm still here. Because I know that, there is no end to this until I suppose I pass away. And then who knows, there still may be no end to it. I don't know. So I think I'm supposed to stop about right now. Stephen, is that true? Yep. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much for having me.